Craig. Let me make a, where's the rest of the special VFR? Come on up, Mark. Please, guys, take your seat. So a little bit of introduction here. The genesis of this discussion on special VFR, you know, we had a fatal accident on the 15th of September out near St. Mary's. 4 people lost their lives. They were on a special VFR clearance at the time. And it just brought to mind, how many people
Hold your mic up closer.
How many people in here have used special VFR in the past? How many people use it regularly? Okay, we got one that uses it regularly, maybe one on the stage too, but most folks do not. And so it's probably worth doing a little bit of review on when it's appropriate and what this, it's a very slippery operation, right? So what we have, who we have up here, Craig Emery on the man.
Your mic has a connection issue.
Maybe it does, Mike.
You'll make the mic.
I guess try to press it up here. So Craig Emery is chief pilot for Spurnack Airways and owner of Craig Air. He's a master pilot, FAA master pilot. Rob Stevenson has statewide operational experience in the center, and we don't, a lot of times when you think about special VFR, all you think about is a tower operator and a pilot, but there's actually a lot of people can be involved. It depends on where you are and what the letters of agreement are. So anyway, Rob's been in the state a long time, currently serving as the runway safety manager here for the state of Alaska. Mark O'Connell, extensive experience in flight service station around the state. He's also an MEI, CFI, II-MEI, lots of bush time. So we've got some smart people up here that know a lot about special VFR. So the way this is going to go, we're going to have the audience ask questions, but if you don't have questions, I've got 19 or 20 of them here that I'm going to ask on your behalf to get this discussion going. So with that, does anybody, Craig, would you like to make some introductory remarks about the subject in general?
I'll follow along.
You'll follow along? Okay. Would anybody like to start? If not, I will start.
Does anybody know what a special VFR is? Okay. What is it?
It's a way to get into Merrill Field when the conditions are bad.
Okay, so is that controlled airspace or uncontrolled airspace?
Control.
Okay, that's what a special is. So class G, no special. Okay.
I have a question. So, how many of you know that the center has agreements with flight service around the state to delegate special VFR space and authorize them to control it? Do you know what that means?
No.
Okay, so let me tell you something that that affects the center greatly. So let's just talk about Bethel. When Bethel Tower closes in the evening or before they open in the morning, that airspace gets delegated to Kenai. And Kenai will run specials there. At Nome, when we're doing that, there's no tower at Nome, but we have a surface area there. And when flight service is open, 99% of the time, the center will delegate special VFR clearances to the flight service. Now, the center has to set up their arrival sequence so that they don't adversely delay an IFR arrival. It doesn't mean that the IFR arrival gets 100% of the time. We don't delay special VFR and provide inappropriate service. It's not always first come, first served. Sometimes it's the airplane that's the closest or has a need or has low fuel, or flight service says I can have them on the ground in 4 minutes. We'll give the IFR aircraft what we call a paper stop. We'll clear them to initial approach fix with a holding clearance, and expect no delay. So, and then when flight service calls us and releases the surface area back to us at the center, we clear the IFR arrival in. We do that handshake multiple times a day when the weather's bad across the state. It's an excellent procedure. We're very fortunate to have flight service in Alaska. They do an outstanding job with it. They get all the information that's needed. They get the count for it. We don't get the count for it at the center. And it's an excellent process. They don't have that anywhere else in the country. Alaska is the last place that has it. Do any of you know what happens when you go into an airport that does not have a flight service station on site, your special VFR, and you don't close your flight plan? Somebody tell me what's the first thing that happens?
You've got the airspace locked up.
So, that's true. So, within 15 minutes, the center will issue an all not. Do you know how many agencies are notified with an all not? It is a massive list. It goes to every flight service station. It goes to both rescue coordination centers. It goes to headquarters FAA. It goes to the Domestic Events Network. Your N number gets broadcast across the entire nation. And it's not a good thing, because you literally turn on resources all over the state. You have people that get called, the helicopter crews that might be going out there, C-130 crews that might be going out to wherever you are, depending on the location. People get notified, woken up, sometimes get to the airport and start gearing up to go, and then you call and say, oh, I forgot to close, I want to get a clearance out now. Now, that's the beauty of that is that nobody's getting fined. This thing sucks. Nobody's getting fined for that, but there's a lot of expense that goes into it. So you have to make sure you close your flight plan. And with the St. Mary's accident, the controller delayed longer than 15 minutes because the company that's involved with this sometimes has a late report. But the expectation is that they would call him and close out. He was also training somebody. So, but we did get it out there. And so I'll let you talk about that a little bit, about what flight service does when you have an overdue.
Well, thank you for having me here this morning. And important to take Rob's point a little step further, communication is extremely important between the pilot and both center and flight service controllers. When you are in that situation, having less than 3 miles or less than 1,000-foot ceilings at these class, generally for us, Class Echo airspaces where we come on board. The Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, those all have towers affiliated with them and TRACONs, but the Echo is kind of where Zan and our lines intersect. But if you do go overdue, we are immediately on the phone. We are getting those resources marshaled up to try to find you. Now, don't let an all not be a scary thing, because if you do wreck, that's a good thing to have an all not working to try to find you. But we also don't like to have to get things spooled up when it's not necessary. So very importantly, if you are on a special VFR clearance and you are either talking to Kenai or Fairbanks Radio remotely, we're relaying those clearances from those hub facilities over the radio. Please make sure you report your downtime as soon as practical, because the clock starts ticking once our last contact was had. And by 10 minutes, if we haven't heard from you in 10 minutes, either out or down through the Class Echo, that's when we start to get sweaty palms and start to do things to find you. So make sure you note that, and it's just the communication part is so important with us to get you down safely. And I'm going to take this to a different point here, but if you find that you need to use a special VFR clearance, it's just make sure that you're making wise decisions. If you're trying to depart out of a special VFR situation and going across country, if you're going to get out of 1.5 miles outside that Class Echo and it's 1.5 miles all the way, ask yourself, is this a wise thing to do? Now, as a tool to get into surface-based controlled airspace, it's a wonderful thing. But if you're departing out of an area, make sure you're asking yourself those questions, like what lays beyond this 4 or 5 nautical mile radius around this airport that I'm going to have to encounter? That's an important part of that decision-making process to keep you and to get you back with your loved ones at the end of that flight. So that's kind of just an introduction from flight service perspective. We have 14 facilities, most of which have Class Echo surface-based areas around them, and then 3 hubs at Fairbanks, Juneau, and Kenai that can also help you get those special VFR clearances. And we work in conjunction through letters of agreement with Anchorage Center controllers. They know us, we know them. We are very efficient getting those clearances to you as quickly as possible. And if for some reason you have to hold, say things are deteriorating quickly and you need to get into Dillingham, for example, the fog's moving in off the bay and things are going south. If you're told to hold outside of the Class Echo there, because of an inbound IFR, we do have to protect that airspace for the IFRs, and they do have that priority. But if things are going south and you're finding yourself in trouble, an emergency declaration might be the way to get you down safely. I don't recommend that as just a normal operating procedure, but if things are going south, that Mayday will help us help you to get that sequencing down to get you down safe. So that's kind of just a quick introduction from my perspective. So I'll hand it back to.
Any questions from the audience? Dick?
Yeah, probably the first time in my 40 years of flying, I got a special VFR out of Lake Hood. And I never could get straight with him what all I had to repeat back to him in order to get the clearance. I got clearance delivery, got my frequency and my squawk code, and everything I repeated back to him wasn't good enough, and we went round and around, and he finally said, just hold tight, I'll get you out of here.
So generally, with special VFR, you only need to repeat if you're given a squawk code, your squawk code and your direction of departing the surface area. So they may have had something special going on. Lake Hood is one of the most challenging places to get a special VFR when it's IFR, because it shuts down some of the arrivals into Anchorage. It can shut off departures. The radar coverage is not great depending on the type aircraft you have. We can't see you on the ground. The ASSC system that we have on the ground at Anchorage will not pick you up like you would see at Anchorage Airport. If you ever really have a complaint like that, if you feel like somebody's not being fair to you or giving you a hard time, make sure you notify the supervisor, ask for the phone number for the facility. Are you all familiar with something called an inquiry that you can do with air traffic control? Do you know what that means? So you can do it with flight service too. Lucas, who's in the back of the room, the air traffic manager for Kenai, he has to do those. When you have an inquiry for services that happen at Kenai with one of the Kenai controllers, he gets to look at it. He gets to assign it to someone. It's the same at the center. The center air traffic manager has to assign it. Same at the tower and the TRACON. They're required investigations for us to do. You can't get in trouble. And you're not going to get a controller fired. The only way we know when you're receiving poor service, when we know that pilots are receiving poor service, is if you tell us. And controllers don't want to do something like that.
I didn't know whether I was getting bad service. I just wanted to know what is the list of things I'm supposed to repeat back so that he's happy.
Yeah, really and truly, your beacon code, the departure direction from the surface area is really it, because that's how they're deciding, but you can also change that once you're in the air. Lake Hood's challenging for special VFR, it really is. Merrill is also very challenging for special VFR because of the proximity to Elmendorf and Anchorage Airport.
Be sure you request a special VFR clearance. They will not prompt you. You have to request and receive the clearance from ATC for that surface area. And operating in this place here, you need to really know where you're going, because let's take a scenario of I left Sleeper Strip, I'm coming to Merrill Field with my clearance, it's a mile. I get out over the inlet, I encounter IMC conditions and I want to escape. I make a right turn, and what happened? I flew into Lake Hood airspace without a clearance. There's strike one, we keep going south. Strike two, you're in Anchorage airspace. You're gonna have to immediately figure out which way to turn when you turn, and possibly declare an emergency to go into that airspace if they can't issue it. If you don't request the clearance, you can't come in. Request, get a clearance.
I have another question for the audience. How many of you have been to Merrill Tower? Okay. Those of you that haven't been, that fly, I highly recommend it. How many of you have been to Anchorage Tower and Tracon? Okay. If you haven't been, I highly suggest that you go. Air traffic controllers are very proud of their facilities. They love to show them to you. One of the things that you will get to see, which is off the topic of special VFR a little bit here, but you'll get to see what their visibility looks like when you're maneuvering around the airport. Lake Hood in particular, that gravel strip, oh my God, we got buildings blocking the one end of the runway. And we can't see you. And the movement area at Lake Hood is what? The runway. Everything else is on your own. So, you know, those things are really good for you to see from the tower perspective, so you can understand why the controller may not say the right thing to you. We're in the season right now of closed surface operations at Lake Hood. The water is frozen, but it is NOTAM'd closed. So we're doing lots of at your own risk operations. And sometimes the controllers, they have no idea what you're gonna do, because they don't really give you a particular clearance. All right, let's see, think of some more questions for these guys.
Is that visibility at Lake Hood gonna improve with the new tower?
Yes, the new tower will be the tallest building in Alaska, 300 feet tall. The current tower is 170 feet, to give you a perspective. And it's going to be, if you drove between Anchorage Tower and Lake Hood Airport and you look to your left, there's a big, long, gray building there. That's where the tower is going to be located. The airport's not renewing leases right now and trying to get people to move that have parking spots over there. They're supposed to break ground next year. So, think of something else here. Oh, how many of you have ever read an NTSB report? Okay, great. Who do they normally blame? Yep. And you know, that's a terrible thing, honestly. I have actually, how many people in here have been interviewed by the NTSB? Okay, so you feel the pain. Is the NTSB nice to you? Do they protect you? Do they care about what you think or what you know, really? What are they looking for when they talk to you?
I would say they've always been nice, but they want the facts, right? That don't care where the chips fall, right?
Right. The NTSB is also aggressive with air traffic control. This crash at St. Mary's, they launched a full NTSB team to the center. The center went through 4 days of interviews. They interviewed random controllers, the controller who was working, the supervisor, the training manager, the air traffic manager, pulled training records. They look at absolutely everything, the last certification. They looked at the training forms of the trainee. They are entitled via Freedom of Information Act, as are all of you actually, to almost all the data that the FAA produces. So the center produced over 400 pages of documents for them. Controller schedules, all of that stuff. And they don't redact it. If they decide to publish anything, if you're an interviewee, your name will be in the report. Let's talk about Dillingham one more time, because that's a great example of it. So Dillingham, how many of you have flown into Dillingham? How many of you have flown into Dillingham IFR? Okay. What's it like when you fly in IFR? What, does the center clear you for the approach usually? How often do you fly in there?
I've only done it a couple of times.
Okay, so let me just say from my perspective, having worked at the center, along with Lucas back there, the controllers rarely clear you for the instrument approach, the localizer approach, the localizer DME. They rarely clear you until you're pretty close to the airport.
It's like 3 miles, right?
Right. Well, no, it'll be further out than 3 miles. 3 miles would be too late. You'll be past the final approach fix. And we don't clear you to land there because flight service is located and it's an uncontrolled airport as far as there's no tower. So when we clear you for the approach, that's sometimes a very tricky place because of the terrain and because we don't like to hold airplanes there because of the terrain and because of the type of approach you're shooting. So we're on the line with flight service a lot when they're running specials to make sure that we can get the surface area clear the IFR in and switch them to advisory. And flight service wants to talk to them as soon as they can so they can tell the specials that are holding outside of the Class Echo where the airplane is, how long their delay is. So a lot of really tight coordination that goes on there. Is that a fair assessment? But all of the airports that have surface areas where flight service provides that service is very good coordination. We're very fortunate to have such a great relationship with flight service in this state. We are truly partnered in every way, from the en route side and from the terminal side as well. Juneau Tower, when it closes, hands off to Juneau Flight Service. If you fly down there when the tower's closed, you'll be talking to Juneau Flight Service. Any other questions?
I got one for Craig. And essentially, Craig's got a lot of experience, you know, in the Anchorage area, but also out in Bethel. So if Craig, not putting you on the spot, but I guess I am, if you could give us a little rundown on Bethel and the terrain differences between there and here, and some history about what they used to have for routes and stuff there.
I don't think I need this. Bethel has one thing that we don't have here, and I was gonna bring up a couple of things that happened here. One, they used to have a letter of agreement. I don't know if they have anymore since they privatized the tower, but they had areas to go for special VFR. They had northeast, northwest,
They don't.
southeast, but I think I think they're still semi-using that.
Oh, please don't tell me that.
Well, it's a great thing. We don't have that here. Who's been in a real 1 mile visibility at Point McKenzie in the summer? Holding with Lake Hood, 6 mile, Merrill Field. Who's been out there? Circling around, everybody's going a different direction, nobody knows where to hold. It's very upsetting. And I can't believe we haven't had a mid-air there because of that. So all you folks that are flying special VFR in and out of Merrill have to realize that. The hold over there is incredibly dangerous. Another one that I'd like to bring up is night. It's 5:30, 5:40 in December, it's past civil twilight. You arrive at Point McKenzie, it's 820. It's still special VFR because it's below 1,000. What do you have to have? An instrument rating, is that instrument rating current? How about your airplane? What's it gotta have? A static check. And if you're using the transponder, you need to have that checked when? There you go. It's right in 91-157, and that one gets skipped all the time. The other thing I want to point out is we arrived, and let's say it's 2 miles of visibility at where? Merrill Field. is that the mouth of Ship Creek. You can't cross that inlet without seeing the lights on the other side, or your what? IMC. So, I've had to deal with a couple of these IMC things going into wrong airspace. It becomes a mess. And he was talking about NTSB. They're a wonderful group that comes out with the facts. They are like your insurance agent. They only deal in the numbers. You know, sometimes you feel like you're being beat up when you're being interviewed by them, but they only go with the facts. They're just like your insurance company. They're very powerful. But they're very smart, and they lay stuff out the way it is. Here's the numbers. So you can look at it two ways. If you're working under them, you're going, geez, the guy's beating me up. But if you're a life that's saved because of something they changed, you're going, oh, he saved my life. So, you know, there's a line right through the middle. You got to kind of look at both sides. An organized hold would be a great thing, but there's no way to do it with this airspace here. So I just want to say this special VFR thing in real life is not the best thing here.
I would agree with one of the things you said earlier. You know, if you find yourself in conditions where you now have to have special VFR, especially if you're running in deteriorating weather, please do not hesitate to declare an emergency. The last thing that anyone wants is for you to really get to that point where we can't help you and where you're stuck in the clouds and, you know, things are going really south for you. We would rather have an emergency and give you priority and do what we can do. One of the reasons that I would suggest that if you haven't done a TRACON tour is we have something in air traffic control called an EOVM. Does anybody know what that means? Emergency Obstacle Video Map. It's designed purely to give information to pilots. God, I hate this thing. Where we can clear you above the terrain. It actually is set up so that the controller can present the pilot with the actual altitude of the terrain where they are, if you have a transponder or ADS-B. So it's an excellent tool. It's used quite frequently with emergency aircraft, more IFR aircraft than VFR, because that's what air traffic control is talking to most of the time. But it's a tool that every approach control has. The center even has it. It's not as high fidelity as within an approach control airspace because we're operating on huge scale. But we also have low altitude alerts that get triggered if we're providing service to you. If we have you tagged up as an aircraft that we're talking to and we're providing service, we can tell if you're below the allowable terrain for where you are, we can tell you to climb. So there's a lot of stuff there. Does anybody want to hear about what an actual event, what goes through? I can kind of walk you through from the center side of what we do. So let's talk about an incident that happened across the inlet about 5 years ago. A Cessna 172 departed Merrill Field, family of 4. The father of the family is flying the aircraft. They made their way around the east side of the inlet, and as they went over to the west, this is in the wintertime in March, early March. And as they're maneuvering around, they started having some carburetor icing issues. The pilot elected to continue flying past Beluga and continued heading west because he saw some clear area and he thought he would be able to get, because he was in kind of a little bit of a hazy area. He thought that was causing him the problem. When he got over there, his engine quit. And he had to land. And he landed beautifully in a wide field of snow that was about 6 feet deep. Everybody survived the crash. This was supposed to be a 3-hour tour. They were not carrying emergency supplies. they had the minimum requirements for this aircraft. So when this happened, nobody from air traffic control was providing services. Within about an hour, their ELT did not go off. That's a key feature of this story. Soft landing in snow, your ELT will not go off, generally. So when they had this accident and they're stuck in the snow, there's no one anywhere near them. His radio is not working. He's just sitting there. A family member, expecting them back within a half hour of their return time, notified flight service. We have this aircraft overdue. Kenai Flight Service put out an all-night. It went to the center. At that time, I was working as the quality control manager at the center. So we look at all these all-nights every time they come in, especially if it's not canceled quickly, and this one was not. So about 20 minutes after the all-night was issued, we started pulling radar data and looking. My staff specialist, his name's Scott, used to work at Merrill Tower as a supervisor. And Scott, while we're looking at this track, we're looking at where the airplane was supposed to go, because the pilot had told his family that was not flying with him where he was going to go. We saw some targets out there, but he did not have a transponder turned on. So we couldn't be sure, and he didn't have ADS-B in his aircraft. But what Scott saw was a Spurnax aircraft in the area with his ADS-B on, with his beacon on, and recognized the N number and called Spurnax and said, hey, do you have the pilot of November so-and-so that I can talk to? I think he was near an aircraft that's overdue. That pilot was coming in to land at Merrill at the time, so when he landed, he called Scott back and said, yeah, I saw that blue and white Cessna. They were headed this direction. Here's where I was when I saw them. We confirmed everything looking at the raw radar data. So that's one of the things that's unique about the center is we have something called an RS3 file. It is a raw radar return. Picks up birds, picks up everything. But we can also tag an aircraft with our playback system and associate that track until it drops off the radar where our radar coverage would be. This track dropped off where we thought our radar coverage should continue. So we thought we identified the aircraft, all from the Spurnax pilot. He confirmed it. With that information and the Spurnax pilot information, we sent search and rescue out there, and they picked them all up. 2 hours later, a blizzard came in and covered the airplane with 4 feet of snow. So resources are out there, but if you don't tell somebody before you're going somewhere enough details so that you can help the people who are looking for you, you're out of luck. Especially if you crash in a big pile of snow, you have no batteries, and you can't self-activate the ELT. Depends on where this aircraft crashed, there's almost nobody flying over that area. IFR, which is who the center's talking to, we're not getting VFR aircraft to look for it, and there were no VFR aircraft in the area either, that far back away from the coastline.
Probably that blizzard coming.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the other feature I want to say is if you're out flying and you're in whatever you're doing, it's super useful. You never know who you're going to see that may have a problem that you might be able to help find. So, details are important. I know all of you have to look out the windshield all the time to make sure when you're flying VFR that you're not going to hit anybody, that you're not near terrain. But, notice the other aircraft and where they are and the orientation from where you are. We do have no places here where there's safe landings in a lot of the state. With the snow, you can make a safe landing if you have control of the aircraft, but you're stuck now. So, any questions about that? Yes, sir.
Were there any injuries?
No, no injuries. Perfect landing, honestly. I saw pictures of the airplane. It was an amazing landing with no power. He did an amazing job. They did recover the airplane in this, about 2 months later.
No, I just want to bring up the point when they're small airplane crashes, people have a tendency to break legs. When they're big airplane crashes, people have a tendency to break hands and arms. So the
It is, yeah, and the pilot actually said, he would never do that again. But, that's great when you can learn a lesson and keep going, but sometimes you don't get a second chance. So, any comments on that? Thoughts?
Wintertime flying, wear what you wanna be sitting in.
Or what you want crashing.
Yeah. Yes,
So if you're a VFR returning to Anchorage and it's socked in, if you're rated, you're current and you're capable, you can just ask for an instrument approach from a VFR flight plan into Merrill, can't you?
yes, you can request an IFR pickup. So one thing, you all already know this, but I think it bears saying out loud, air traffic control does not know your ratings. We don't know if you're certified to fly special VFR at night. We don't know how your airplane's equipped. We just issue clearances. If you get a good clearance and you do a good job and you land and no reports go in, nobody will know. If you don't, then you'll be involved in the investigation. But, air traffic control is not in the business of regulating pilots' certifications. We just issue clearances to you. And, let's talk a little bit about multiple aircraft using special VFR together. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Or would you rather not?
Well, it's the see and avoid thing, right? So when we're in a mile of visibility, how far can you see? A mile. And when you start getting 3, 4, 5 airplanes in a hold, it's usually more than a mile, so you're not seeing and avoiding. And that's very dangerous, because if the one guy gets up here, which is why that thing fell apart kinda, he's turning and you don't know it, and you think, oh, maybe he's going out 2 extra miles, you turn in and you're setting up for a mid-air collision. Also, having an arrival and a departure, you got a departure coming out of Lake Hood and an arrival coming to Merrill Field, a mile. That's pretty fast closure rate, even if you're slowed down to 90. And if you're not looking, if you don't have an ADS-B display, you can't see anything coming. You might be focusing on, I'm flying the airplane. I have to maintain ground contact, my mile visibility. And I can't believe it hasn't happened yet. And that's been my biggest fear coming from Southwest Alaska to here. The traffic and the airspace complicates it. It really complicates special VFR to fly it legally. Now, you gotta do what you gotta do, and you should be probably prepared if your IMC not rated or current, the plane's not rated, to declare the emergency. Don't be afraid to declare an emergency, it's just paper. If you don't make it, you can't fill it out.
Craig, would you say, in my experience, one of the most difficult things is actually accurately judging your in-flight visibility? Because it always sucks you in. It's a little hazy, and then maybe it's a little hazier. And
Yeah, well, you want to keep going, right?
Yeah, and how far
I can
away
still
is
see.
it?
The other thing we're gonna think about special VFR is the time of year when it's safer or not. Right now is not safe. That fog, you touch it, it's ice. So now we're gonna fly in a mile of visibility in our 206. And now we put a little frost on the windshield. Whoop, now we're down to a half mile. Now we're moving our head. How's that doing for your ears? Pretty soon the plane's going all around, and do I take the instruments now or keep going VFR? And that is usually my experience of the splats. People flying into the terrain, they're coming in at 200 AGL, it's white out, get a little ice on the window, and you don't even see it coming, and you hope for that snow you're talking about, because you'll hit it and you usually just slide to a stop. But when you hit a little hill, you don't slide to a stop. And you also want to think, when you're flying over that white tundra going in, A tundra pond isn't necessarily smooth all the way around. You skid across a lake into an embankment, it's like having a head-on in your car. So, and you can't judge that in that kind of conditions. It's white out, it's flat light, it's like landing a float plane on classic water. So it's not as easy as it looks, and I know I always preach the emergency end, but that's my business. You know, we're air taxi, the pilots are trained to take care of an emergency. And so a lot of times we think that a lot, you know, what if? Most pilots should be looking out the window going, what if? When you get that special and it starts getting night, those numbers the insurance company and NTSB talk about just grow like this. And so, you know, really night flying special VFR is IFR. Which is a whole new set of rules, right? Really, my airplane, me. When you start talking about air taxi, the pilot's got to have 1,200 hours to fly IFR. How many hours you got? You know, so look up your stuff once in a while. Dave?
Can I talk about deviations resulting from emergencies for a minute?
Absolutely.
Okay, a microphone for this, so I don't.
Yep.
Is this gonna work?
Testing. Okay, folks, David Karolinus. I'm off work today. Here's a civilian that doesn't fly enough in my 2 project airplanes, but for the last 10 years, I was the policy lead for the FAA Safety and Compliance Team, the policy owning office and headquarters, and for the last 3 years, we worked on a project to change flight standards policy for deviations resulting from in-flight emergencies. So these guys said emergency enough times, I wanted to come up here and share that with you. So how many working CFIs do I have out there that are teaching regularly? Okay, every CFI should know this, and if anybody wants me to come talk to a group of students about this for free, I'm happy to do it when I'm off work, okay? Because I think it's really important. So we all have heard of the the NTSB safety recommendations that they sent to the FAA and others. Well, the FAA also has internal safety recommendations, and there were 2 separate investigative teams. One was for the Kobe Bryant helicopter accident, the Calabasas accident, and there was another one, and they both came up with roughly the same recommendation, and that is to change enforcement policy for what we do to a pilot when they have deviations resulting from in-flight emergencies. So since the 50s at least, it has been NTSB case law that if you declare an emergency and land safely, like Craig said, it's, you know, you got to survive to fill out the paperwork, and that's a good thing. But since at least the 50s, since before the FAA was founded in 1958, NTSB policy has been, if the emergency was of the pilot's own making, then you can exercise emergency authority under 91.3 or whatever, but Flight Standards is going to take enforcement action against you for everything in that situation if it was your fault that you got into the emergency situation, right? So from a modern safety management and risk management perspective, the most important thing is that we get everybody in the airplane on the ground safely. So we have for years wanted to change that policy and say, we don't care how you got into the emergency, we just want you all to get out of it safely, right? And then the rest is gravy. So over the last 3 years, my team worked with the Chief Counsel's office, and we got a sentence or 2 changed in the Compliance and Enforcement Order, FA Order 2150.3, Chapter 6, Paragraph 2 Alpha, you can go read it. And then we revised the Flight Standards Policy in Order 8900.1, Volume 14, Chapter 3, Section 7. I can write all this down for you, and there's an extensive list of scenarios in there to explain this. But now, going forward,
if you handle the emergency properly, you declare, you do good decision making, you deviate only to the extent necessary to meet the emergency and land safely, all of those regulatory deviations, which the NTSB used to call a violation of the rule, not just using your deviation authority, all those are off the table for enforcement action, okay? So you may still be in trouble if you didn't pre-flight, if you didn't check your fuel, if you did continued VFR and IMC, right? But the actions that you have to deviate from, like you didn't communicate because you were too busy keeping the wings level and you busted an altitude or somebody's airspace or whatever because you were responding to the emergency, that is no longer something that the FAA can take enforcement action against you on. And I'd like everybody that flies to know that, because it removes a huge amount of pressure, right, from your decision making. If you know, I did everything right, something bad happened, and now I'm in an emergency, but I don't want to tell anybody because I might get in trouble. Well, you're not going to get in trouble for any of those things that you deviate from to meet the emergency, okay? If you use good judgment. And part of good judgment is getting the help of all these guys when you're in an emergency, right? If you talk, if you ask for help, if you declare, or even declare an urgent situation, right? That's in the aim before you get to an emergency, right? Before you get to Mayday, you're using all the resources that you have to get down safely. And that's the most important thing, that we don't hurt anybody, right? So keep that in mind. If anybody wants more information, I can, Rocky knows how to get a hold of me. Are there any FAA people in here, current, not retired? Okay, we lucked out, no FSDO guys today. They probably don't know about this yet either. The new policy published in September, and we do a crappy job in the government of, actually, we send out too much information, right, to just keep up with, but probably most FSDO inspectors don't know that either. But you should know it in case you have to declare the emergency and explain to them what the FAA policy is. So keep that in mind. Don't sweat the small stuff, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate, but please reach out and ask for help when you need it before it gets too critical and you're out of options. Thanks.
You guys know when you're getting down to the edge, we've all flown, right? It starts with that feeling, and then you're, my mouth's getting dry. This isn't good, what do I do? Don't even think emergency, declaring the outcome of the emergency, just declare it. They'll help, and they're gonna open up stuff for you to help you get in. You can worry about all the rest of it tomorrow, or let's see, federal holiday, Saturday, Sunday, right? So, the big thing is to just get on the ground and get out of the airplane. All that hoo-ha that comes later, you'll figure out.
So air traffic control, I don't want that microphone anymore. I hate that thing. Air traffic control, when we have a pilot deviation that occurs for whatever reason, we don't make the determination whether it's flight service or the center or the towers or the TRACONs on what the outcome is going to be of the flight standards investigation. We provide data to them. I recently took the compliance training that Flight Standards offers on FAAsafety.org. There's actually a video series on there with questions, and it's what they normally assign to you is a video series to watch if you're in an event that does not involve a compliance type situation, where it's just a training situation, which 90+%, I would say more like 95%.
What's an example? Like an altitude bust or something?
I'll give you one. Juneau, we had the same pilot go out to do intersection departures, and he turned the wrong way, both times, 2 days in a row. The tower is required to report that. It's a wrong surface attempted departure. We are required to report it. It's considered a very serious event because we have traffic coming to the active runway and he's turning the wrong way. There was no traffic involved in this. So that took the heat off of him immediately. And they write that. Air traffic control writes that in the report. He received counseling
verbal only, from the flight standards investigator in Juneau. Nothing went into his permanent file. He went and did that training on FAAsafety.org. Yeah, all of you can take it anytime without being assigned it. It's about, what, have you taken that training?
I think so, a long time ago, and it's .gov, FAC.
So, that's right, yeah, .gov, thank you. It's like an hour and a half, but it has links like you would not believe to different types of resources that are out there. It's actually very well done. Flight Standards did an excellent job putting that together. There's a lot of effort, a lot of thought that went into it. It's a good refresher for pilots because it goes through all the psychological factors that can happen that can lead to an event. It goes into checklist use and making sure you have a very thorough, which is what this pilot did not do. He was in a hurry, doing the same thing he's done all the time, and he turned the wrong direction, going to his cabin to haul supplies. And so he got reported. The compliance philosophy that I have encountered personally with Flight Standards is all about the pilot making the right decision for safety's sake and not endangering other people. If you don't endanger another person, I can't imagine that you're going to end up with a compliance type of action where you would end up not being able to do training of some kind that is non-punitive. And I don't know of any flight standards people, and I know a lot of them, who want to be punitive. They just want you to be safe and learn and be a better pilot. It's all about self-correction. Does that sound fair to you?
Marshall, I see you have another question out there.
Yeah, it's for Mark. Put you on the spot. Yeah, I'm not talking Class D airspace and the complexities of Anchorage, but Class C surface areas out in the bush that you guys are responsible for when you got the delegated authority. What's your take on multiple aircraft visual separation? You know, Craig talked about swarming outside the Class C surface area, so if you could shed some light on flight service.
Did you all hear Marshall's question?
So I'm going to try without the microphone. If you all can't hear me, I'll be glad to grab it, but this is an important topic for our perspective. So the question is basically about multiple aircraft operating within a flight service area that's surface-based Class Echo. So Dillingham, Nome, Sitka, places like that. And there is a carve-out. Now, it's not in Part 91, so you don't necessarily know about it from the pilot's perspective. However, in our letter of agreement and in our flight service orders, we have a carve-out that allows multiple special VFR aircraft to operate within the zone, the Class Echo surface area, simultaneously. And the way that it works is, I used to work Iliamna a lot. Iliamna is a good case study for a lot of these special VFR. Number one, it's a transitionary airport for folks coming through Lake Clark Pass on their way to places like Dillingham and King Salmon down in Southwest. And it's also on the lake, so oftentimes you'll get weather that blows in and affects half of the Class Echo, and the airport itself is clearing 1 million. So, but the way that you can request, if you are, first of all, if you're not comfortable with operating with multiple aircraft in the zone, it's probably best not to volunteer that. To Craig's point earlier, if it's a mile reported, it's legal, but is it smart to operate with multiple aircraft in the zone? Personally, I wouldn't do that. Because if you can only see a mile and the zone itself is usually 4 or 5 mile radius from the airport, that's 8 or 10 miles across. And if somebody's coming from the northwest and you're coming from the southeast, there's no way you're able to see them if the prevailing visibility is 1.5 or 2. So, but to Marshall's question, it is possible. And if you come up with radio and say, Dillingham Radio, November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, requesting special VFR to land at the airport. I'm inbound from the southeast. I'm 10 miles out at whatever point or whatever. And I will maintain visual separation from any and all aircraft. Those are your magic words. That turns a light bulb on our controller's mind that we can then take additional aircraft in. This happens a lot with some of the lodge people because they're all in ADSB. They're all flying their beavers and otters out from whatever activities they were doing out in the bush, and they will coordinate with each other, and so we are able to maintain that visual separation. However, when you say those words and when you accept that, you're accepting your own visual separation. Flight Service does not have radar. We don't have the tools that center and tower have, frankly, to maintain separation like the more advanced facilities. And so if you do that, it's on you to make sure that you can see and that you can avoid those aircraft, because if you come into a downwind opposite direction or something, could have a near midair. But there are carve-outs, and if it's like 800-foot ceiling and 10 miles, that's a great example where maintaining your own visual separation would be appropriate, because you've got the visibility need. But as visibility deteriorates, I personally would recommend not doing that at less than 3. So if you are already operating in the zone and you have not said those words, that zone is yours until you conclude whatever activity it is you're doing, whether you're departing and you report clear or whether you're down and clear. And if a secondary aircraft comes into that zone and says, hey, I'm going to maintain visual separation, requesting a special VFR to land at Ileana, that's great, but then our controller has to go back to you, number one, and say, hey, number one, there's a beaver holding outside the Class Echo. Do you agree to maintain visual separation from that aircraft? If your answer is no, that puts the brake on that person. You're not being a jerk, you're being safe. That person will have to hold outside the Class Echo until you are either down or you are clear of the zone, and then we can work that person in. However, like I said, it's 10 miles and 800, and you can see each other, you got all your landing lights on, great, flame on. But I just want to make sure that, per Marshall's question, that you are aware that we do have a carve-out to operate multiple aircraft. And also, if you are a formation flight, the regs say that both aircraft have to be two-way radio equipped. So that way you can hear the traffic, you can hear the communications of the other aircraft that are operating in the zone. If you do not have a radio, then Flight Service has to coordinate that with Center. That's Center's bailiwick if you're no radio. And it's, again, I don't think it's a good idea. If you don't have radio, special VFR is a bad idea. And even declaring an emergency becomes problematic if you don't have a radio. So those are a couple of thoughts about that. And then, sir, per your question about the elements of a clearance, from Flight Service's perspective, our script says November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you are cleared to depart to the northeast, maintain special VFR conditions at or below 1,500 feet or whatever it is for that zone. Report clear of the zone if you're departing. So it's similar to an IFR clearance, and I want to be clear with you all, it is not an IFR clearance, but the elements are very similar for a special VFR clearance. Where you're going, what your altitude cap is. Now, we don't actually assign you a hard altitude, but you do have to stay below, again, for separation for possible IFR traffic above that altitude. And also just that you're going to be clear. So November 1, 2, 3, 5 is cleared to depart to the southeast. We'll maintain special VFR conditions at or below 1,500, and I'll report clear. Would be the proper readback. Now, as far as Lake Hood, I cannot speak to how the squawk codes and things go, because when we have the zones from Center, we don't provide squawk codes. There's no radar generally coverage at those altitudes that we're dealing with. But similar to an IFR clearance, where you're going, what your altitude cap is, and that you need to report when you're done with the airspace is kind of the request. And then one last thing while I've got the floor. If some of you folks fly no radio or are in the habit of not calling Flight Service, if you're flying through Ileana's Class Echo airspace, I had this happen to me a few years ago. A beaver called up and said, he was on a special VFR inbound. He says, hey, who's this cub out here? You guys talking to him? I didn't know there was a cub out there. So this person violated the Class Echo because it was less than 3 miles and or less than 1,000 feet. And that was, I had to report that as a possible pilot deviation, and that gave me no joy, because it was the taste you get in your mouth. I got that taste immediately going, oh gosh, there's somebody out there. He or she's not talking to me, and is a potential hazard. So make sure you're monitoring the weather en route, and if you're no radio, if you see things deteriorate, please stay away from Class Echo if you can't talk to us.
A lot of that kind of stuff is because the person flying the plane doesn't realize it's a Class Echo surface area. So when you look at it, it's not the magenta circle, it's the sewing machine stitch. So there's a difference.
So it's important that you, like I said, when it started, the communications are just so key. And Flight Service, we are there to help you, and if the weather's rotten, Sometimes we have insights on where it's not wrong, we can help you get to where you need to be to get down safely. So, Marshall, did I address that thoroughly?
Thank you.
I have a plug for a special VFR really quick that I promised myself I would say today, so I'm gonna say it while I'm thinking about it. Please relay a PIREP after you depart or you land if you fly a special. It has been the biggest heartache of my career in quality control, trying to evaluate the center and the terminals, their performance of the controllers in getting PIREPs when the conditions are special VFR. Even this accident at St. Mary's, there was an aircraft that went in ahead of the aircraft that crashed, that relayed a PIREP that the controller didn't tell them about. The controllers are supposed to relay PIREPs that are 15 minutes or less old to the subsequent flight. This was beyond the 15-minute time requirement, but one of the things, the center philosophy that we have as our policy there is it doesn't matter how old the PIREP is. If it's the next aircraft in, we give them the PIREP from the last one we got, unless it's, you know, stale, like 2-3 hours away. But you gotta relay PIREPs. We need PIREPs in flight service. We need them in the center. You guys need them to help you make a decision on what you're doing. Please relay them. Especially if you fly outbound on a special VFR, that is the best information that anybody's gonna have on the flight conditions for that airport.
And if you're part 135, remember the end of the surface area is 502, not 1 mile. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wondered what, when you're working the flight services work as a Class E, what kind of tools do you have? Do you have ADS-B inputs at the facility, or say you don't have radar or nothing?
We're basically relying on the pilots to tell us where they are, and so that's again why communication is so key. If you're number one and then number two comes in and you're all special and everybody says they're okay maintaining separation, then once your clearance is received, then you two pilots talk to each other and say, hey, I'm here, okay, I'm over here, and that way you're helping enhance the visual picture for everybody as to what's going on, since your physical visibility is reduced and or ceiling. There's some movement towards getting us some more tools, but frankly bandwidth is a real problem for us out in a lot of our bush facilities. And so we have our Oasis system, but there's no live tracking. We rely a lot on center. If we've got a phone line we can pick up and say, like, if we lose, if an aircraft forgets to report departing, we can maybe see if they're still squawking. We have tools we can use, but we don't have the direct tools that Tracons and towers and the centers have.
Right. So you don't have an ADS-B input. Somebody does have ADS-B on.
Not yet. There's some movement towards that, but with the way things move, that's.
Juno does.
Juno, yes, that's correct. Juno does.
Juno Flight Service has a slave off of the ZAN system, same as Juno Tower. Juno Tower does not have their own separate radar system, and Bethel Tower also has the same thing. Bethel has a slave system, but they're running off a modem. How many of you use a modem? So we don't have fiber optic, sadly, between Juneau and Anchorage. So we can't give them a fiber optic connection to our system at the center. The same with Bethel, obviously. Now we are gonna get around the state. I hope all of you have ADS-B, and shame on you if you don't. Because, I mean, you all know, anybody in this room knows that you improve the safety of everybody around you and yourselves having that on your airplane. You gotta have it. Alaska is so unforgiving without it, and we are spending your tax dollars as fast as we can to improve ADS-B service around the state, against the objections of other entities within the FAA that'd rather have the money. We're putting ADS-B in Kodiak next year. The first time we'll have surveillance at Kodiak below 18,000 feet. We'll have ADS-B surveillance around Kodiak. Juneau, we have excellent ADS-B equipment there when it works, because of the weather, but there's, around the state, when I got here in 1987, Anchorage Center had 2 radars. The whole state was non-radar with the exception of Fairbanks and Kenai. Kenai radar and Murphy radar. That's all we had.
And the whole state is covered, most of it now, where all the airports are, for the most part, the bigger airports, we have ADSB coverage everywhere. It's a great tool for air traffic control. It's a great tool for you all as pilots to see and avoid each other. It increases your situation. I don't need to sell it, but you know, I just wish everybody had it, because it's like, it's better than your ELT.
So I like to point out, as I know a lot of pilots, I'm in maintenance, the expenditure of see and avoid, I only need it in Class Charlie airspace. There's one airport in the state that requires it, I'm not getting it. Well, I've been involved in 2 search and rescues where the ELT didn't work, and the ADSB brought it right almost to the spot. So if you want to think about your ELT, which is kind of good, that ADSB enhances your 406 ELT to, it's just another great tool.
We'll find you fast. If you have ADSB, we will find you quickly. I mean, it's a guarantee. If you don't have it, we'll be searching that raw radar, and maybe we can find you, maybe we can't. But it's an amazing tool. Air traffic control, flight service, flight standards, everybody involved in providing service to pilots wants to do their best to keep you safe and to find you when something bad happens. And you know, it's heartbreaking when we can't find people. We had an incident where a pilot flew from Fairbanks down to Yakutat. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that accident that happened. We never found him. Never found his airplane, never found him. You know, no ADSB, off the glass, gone.
Well, gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our hour, and I want to thank you. Quick question for the audience. How many of you read the last safety spot that we put out on Special VFR? Okay, if you haven't, you know, it's posted on the website, so just go to asfonline.org, top line, there's a tab. It covers the basics of SVFR, which, so we kind of skipped right into some of the varsity level discussion topics here, but it covers, you know, where does it apply, what are the visibility and ceiling minimums, what happens at night, et cetera, et cetera. It's a good, quick little 2-page read, and it's got links to the regs and that, so you don't have to thumb through your AIM or whatever to find it. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you haven't registered when you came in this morning at the front door of the first table, please do that if you want wings credit. We're also taking membership renewals for 2025. So if you still want to do that and haven't done it, just come on up to the next table. I'll be there. And if Michael Schwenkel, could you just see me before you go out there? I got a question.
I'm in trouble already.
And remember, if you renew for 2025, you'll get a ticket and get a chance on TV. Okay, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. If you don't need to leave the room, I ask you to stay in here because there is no such thing as a 10-minute break, as we all know. But Bart Stone will be up covering survival stuff, which dovetails nicely with what we were just hearing about Special VFR.
I didn't think so.
That was good. Thank you.